Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. Today is May 27. Today, as we continue to read in our daily Bible reading, we continue to read and explore the life of Solomon. Remember, Solomon is one who prayed to God for wisdom or for a discerning heart, and God, impressed with this request, grants him not only the request for wisdom, but the things that Solomon didn't request: wealth and fame and power and all those things for which Solomon has become famous through the ages. But is Solomon really the wisest of all men? It appears that he has this great wisdom that is unsurpassed by any. The Queen of Sheba travels and sees it for herself, and she says even the half has not been told her. And so Solomon is this amazing, wise king. But in today's reading, we start to see Solomon's demise. We start to see that he's not using that wisdom that God has granted him, and Solomon is beginning to turn his heart away from God. We start to read about Solomon's marriage to foreign wives. Now, we know through our previous readings that God has always forbidden his people from intermarrying with the neighboring pagan nations. This is not a racial issue. This is a spiritual issue. The reason God doesn't want his people intermarrying with other nations is because he knows that these other nations will allure them and tempt them toward worshiping other gods, toward idolatry, because these pagan nations are an idolatrous people. Well, Solomon believes that he is in love with 700 wives and 300 concubines. That's mind-boggling. How could he possibly love all of these women at the same time? And yet, because he feels that he loves all of them, he wants to keep them happy. He has his heart drawn after their gods, and they lead him, just as God had forecast, into idolatry. So Solomon himself, who was the wisest man, is not using his wisdom. He turns to idolatry. His heart, we're told, is not fully devoted to the Lord the way his father David's was. Now, you remember, David had many mistakes of his own. David fell into sin himself, but he was always described as a man after God's heart because his heart was fully devoted to God. Here we see that Solomon's heart is not devoted to God at the level his father David's was. Solomon is even one who not only is led astray by his wives, but he builds high places for these foreign gods and worships them there. So God is going to respond angrily. God is going to tell Solomon that he's going to tear his kingdom away. Now remember, God had promised Solomon, as long as you're faithful, as long as you follow my commands, as long as you teach others to do the same, you will always have a descendant on the throne. But if you turn your back on me, if you rebel against me, this promise will be broken. And so the covenant is revoked because God, as an angry response, says, I'm going to take away the kingdom that I had promised you. And I'm not going to do it during your lifetime. This is interesting because of my love and respect for David, your father. But it is going to be taken away from your descendants. God even raises up Hadad, the Edomite, to be an adversary. Now, the Edomites earlier had been wiped out by Joab and his soldiers, but Hadad had escaped to Egypt as a young man. Now he's been raised in Egypt and comes back, and God uses him in Israel to be an adversary, a thorn in the side of Solomon. God also, we're told, raises up a man by the name of Rezon to be an adversary to Solomon. And then we're introduced to Jeroboam. Now, if you're familiar at all with Old Testament history, you probably remember Jeroboam as a bad guy, as one that's going to rebel against God. And that would be true. But I want you to notice these early stages of our introduction to Jeroboam. He is described as a man of standing. As a matter of fact, he's recognized as a man of great character and great leadership by Solomon, and Solomon puts Jeroboam in charge of all his labor forces. Then we're introduced to Ahijah, a prophet of God, who encounters Jeroboam as they're out walking. And Ahijah is described as wearing a new cloak. When he sees Jeroboam, he takes off his cloak, he rips it into 12 pieces, and tells Jeroboam to take 10 of them. When Jeroboam takes 10 of those pieces, Ahijah goes on to prophesy that the kingdom of Israel is going to be divided, that the tribes are going to be split, and 10 of the tribes will follow Jeroboam, and he will be their king. So that's a promise that's made, and there's even going to be a promise, as we'll see in just a moment, that Jeroboam has a promise very similar to that was originally made to Solomon. I want you to notice this on page 674 in the last section of our reading today. God speaking says, "But I will not take the whole kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I have made him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of David, my servant, whom I chose, and who observed my commands and statutes. I will take the kingdom from his son's hands and give you, Jeroboam, 10 tribes. I will give one tribe to his son, so that David, my servant, may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I chose to put my name." However, listen to this. God speaking to Jeroboam, "As for you, I will take you, and you will rule over all that your heart desires. You will be king over Israel. If you do whatever I command you and walk in my ways and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes and commands as David my servant did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David, and will give Israel to you. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever." All of these promises are made to Jeroboam. If you'll be faithful, you can have the 10 tribes. I will be with you. You will be a successful king. And then we have this little snippet at the end of today's reading. Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt, to Shishak the king, and stayed there until Solomon's death. It could be that Solomon discovers this promise that's been made to Jeroboam. But I wanted you to notice today that Jeroboam, though he's ultimately not going to make the best decision either, has an opportunity to be successful. Solomon had an opportunity to be successful. And yet, when they turn their hearts away from God, they are going to be punished, and the promises are revoked. I think this is a great lesson even for us today. God wants you and God wants me to be successful. He wants to honor our lives as he wants us to honor him. He wants us to be obedient to his commands, to follow his ways, so that he can bless us over and over again. But if we choose to rebel, if we turn our backs on God, he will not bless. It's as simple as that. It's not about what we can or can't do, but it's about a God who loves us, who died to save us, and who wants to live with us eternally. This story, once again, is about God. And the question for each of us is, what will we do with him? Isn't it great to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.